So thanks everyone for joining us today in the first of 3 webinars that we have coming up in March. This first session aims to give you an overview around what's happening in client listening and CX experience within professional services at the moment. Really pleased to say that today I'm joined by my colleagues Silvia and Bertie. I'm Alastair Beddow. I'm the Managing Director here at Meridian West. Today's session is being recorded and will be available to watch back on our YouTube channel shortly after today. As I've just mentioned, we've got 2 other sessions coming up later this month. So if you're interested and haven't registered for those, please do so. Next week, we have Ian Bennison joining us from Intertrust, talking all about their CX program and how they've really used technology to scale up that program very, very successfully over the last year or so. And then in a fortnight's time, on the 17th of March, I'll be joined by Rachel Montgomery and Kim Thane from DAC Beechcroft, who will be talking a little bit about their program, how they've managed to, again, really embed that within the firm within the last few years and some of the secrets of their success. Today, before we dive in, just a quick introduction. Those who haven't come across Meridian West before, we very much describe ourselves as the strategic insight partners to some of the world's leading advisory businesses. Client listening and client experience is one of 3 key pillars of the work we do. And you can see on the screen some of the kinds of organizations that we work with across the professional services and B2B spectrum. As I said, really delighted to be joined by my colleagues Silvia and Bertie today. Silvia, do you want to give a quick introduction?
Hi everyone, my name is Silvia Grigoroiu and I'm very pleased to say that I've been working for almost 7 years at Meridian West and working with my colleagues towards developing effective client listening programs in terms of technology, innovation and scalability. So happy to be here today.
Thanks so much, Silvia. And Bertie.
Hi everyone, I'm Bertie Heppel. I'm one of the newer team members of the Meridian West team. I've been with the company for about 6 months, during which time I've worked on a number of client listening programs for major law firms and other professional services firms. My background before that was in the financial world, looking at competitor benchmarking and customer experience, mainly for banks. So I'm kind of bringing a bit of the learnings from that over into this side of things.
Fantastic. So in terms of the next 30 minutes, we want to cover off a few different things. First, to give you a flavour of what we see are 5 key trends shaping the CX and client listening agenda today for professional firms. So things that should be and are on the radar right now. Then taking a look at 4 lessons that collectively between the 3 of us we've teased out as key things from our recent experience working with firms, key kind of pitfalls or areas of focus when it comes to client listening, and then wrapping up with 3 areas of focus for the year ahead. Some thoughts around what we see some of the leaders in this space doing. Again, some lessons to learn from. So 5, 4, and then 3 areas of focus. We do want to leave a bit of time at the end for Q&A. The chat function is open, so if you have questions as we go through, please type them in and we'll be on the lookout for those. Or there'll be a little bit of time at the end to do that. So don't hesitate to share any questions, any clarification, anything you'd like to ask to myself, Bertie or Silvia. So let's dive in. So first off, some trends that we see impacting the CX landscape today, the client experience and client listening landscape. I think first off, big picture, and I think something that really kind of weaves across these 5 trends is that client listening is very much being changed in approach from being a kind of a project-based activity. So 5-10 years ago, we would have worked with firms who saw, client listening, client engagement as a particular project, whereas actually now it's becoming much more embedded as a business as usual activity. It's part of a wider spectrum of client engagement activity, and is becoming much more embedded into the way that the firm does business, interacts with clients. It's being seen less as a kind of standalone initiative and much more deeply embedded in an ongoing learning and development process in the way that client relationships are kind of tracked and managed over time. And I think there's kind of 5 key trends that we're seeing, certainly, that have accelerated that movement towards being seen as a BAU activity. The first of these is what we're calling front foot feedback, triple F there. And I think basically what we're seeing here is over the last couple of years, feedback is very much, and client listening is very much kind of accelerated, partly due to the pandemic and different ways of working there, but into a much more kind of agile and strategically responsive activity. So rather than simply just looking at feedback as a tool to measure past performance, how did we do on client engagement, thinking about particular client satisfaction, actually that's really important, but also broadening those conversations to encompass much wider agenda. Particularly responding to some of the kind of important strategic priorities around issues like ESG, diversity and inclusion, technology and innovation, these broader topics which are really important in terms of capturing client and market insight around what's happening. And we've also seen that in the way that firms have responded in terms of their tactical activity. So again, ranging from much more iterative touch points as well as kind of continuous activity throughout the course of a year. Second one, something that we're calling T-shaped feedback. Bertie, what do we mean here?
Yeah, so T-shaped feedback, I suppose, is a phrase that we're borrowing from perhaps the way professional advisors sometimes operate, having a very broad cross section of knowledge, but also a very deep specialism in a particular area. Certainly, I think when it comes to client feedback, we are seeing more and more firms interested in not only capturing the entire breadth of opinion across the entire client portfolio, but also looking to really kind of drill down and get some much more qualitative feedback from a couple of key accounts. I think doing things this way, we're seeing some of our clients having a relative amount of success with. I think it's a very efficient way to ensure that you're not only getting a very large sample size when you're looking at these things, but also that's very specific useful insight from some of your key contacts.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think what's really interesting is we are definitely seeing that balance between wanting to capture a very broad perspective, benchmark how the whole firm is performing, but then take those deep dives in particular service lines or product areas, sector groupings, or as Bertie was saying, key clients. So real kind of some real thought around the balance of investment around trying to capture a whole firm view and a deep dive in particular segments. I think the kind of third thing that we're really seeing as well is, and again prompted by the big changes in the last couple of years, is that client listening is being used as a way to really understand how hybrid working and hybrid client relationships could be managed more effectively, and in particular really trying to distill down on what some of those moments of magic essentially might be in that context of a client relationship. What are the things that really make the difference? And actually one of the things that we know is that working virtually and working in a hybrid way has altered that dynamic of the relationship. So actually teasing out within the context again of a client journey or a client engagement, where are the real areas for differentiation, because we know again that client experience from the benchmarking research that we do amongst CMOs at professional services and B2B organizations, that's still very much seen as the battleground, the experience battleground, to be one of the leading firms in terms of delivering that client experience excellence consistently. And the change around hybrid working has certainly brought that into focus much more clearly. Fourth area, and again something that's been changing a lot over time, is around the use of technology and data. And Silvia, I know you've got some thoughts around what you're seeing here.
Sure. So I would say the continuous technological advances have enabled us to capture and analyze the data in a more effective way, especially when it comes to reviewing text data, which is captured from the in-depth interviews. We have been able to deliver more value and quicker with the help of AI and text analytics. So saving time here is a great asset. We have also been able to see great efficiency in terms of the follow-up and keeping track of specific responses, such as unsatisfied clients, with the use of the automated email triggers, which are being sent straight away when this feedback is being provided. And as well, we have been able to monitor and manage the follow-up process with the help of and the use of the dashboards. And this technology is constantly changing, giving us an easier access to KPIs, having this at a click of a button, improving data visualization so we can have more interactive tools. And especially that the dashboards are acting as a one-stop shop. You have all the research in one single dashboard, and I think
yeah, it's so powerful, isn't it? I mean, I think you hit on a really kind of key phrase around accessibility, and I think the kind of technology has really facilitated greater accessibility to that kind of data, real-time analytics, KPI, benchmarking, and I know that's very much at the heart of kind of the approaches that we take with clients is to provide access to that real-time data, so that client insight can really help kind of drive the conversation around areas for investment, future opportunities, in a way that 5 years ago, 10 years ago, we were relying much more on manual processes to really crunch that data and drive the insights. And I know you were saying there, Silvia, as well about kind of driving efficiency, right? I mean, it's been a huge a huge way for firms to actually scale programs quite quickly with quite limited kind of internal team or resource.
Yes.
What about let's look at our fifth area, and one of the things that we've seen in terms of the changing approach to CX and client listening is actually much more innovation around the kinds of audiences and touch points. And I know, Bertie, for example, you've been working a lot recently around the kind of high net worth audience, which traditionally has been an audience that I think firms have slightly shied away from engaging with when it comes to client listening activity. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about what you're seeing there.
Yeah, so certainly I think this as well feeds into some of the things that we spoke about around the T-shaped feedback. I think we are seeing firms looking to reach out to new audiences, to audiences beyond perhaps their kind of traditional client base and beyond that kind of as to mention business to business client base that has really, I think, been the bread and butter for client listening for a while. And with that comes, I think, new ways of listening, new ways of engaging. Certainly when looking at high net worth, when looking at the top ends of the FTSE 250 and the C-suite, the methods used to engage with those particular audiences are a lot more bespoke, a lot more tailored to their particular needs, to their particular interests and the challenges that they're facing.
Yeah, no, that's so right. And I think also, on that piece around different touch points, I think what we're seeing as well is that firms, yes, still very much keeping a focus on those kind of key account deep dives, that kind of broad encompassing conversation, but actually thinking about, are there key moments around maybe client onboarding for new clients, 3 months, 6 months in, capturing feedback around that kind of experience, focusing on matter delivery, different types of matters, and again shaping quite a tailored approach there. So I think just being perhaps a little bit more creative and innovative around some of those channels and touch points. So I think these 5 trends are certainly things that we're seeing shaping the landscape. I would suggest to those on the kind of live webinar today that if these aren't in your consideration set to some degree, then you're probably not touching on the full potential around what CX and client listening can do in terms of being seen as a much more BAU activity. And these are certainly kind of key things that we're encouraging the organizations that we work with to think about when it comes to kind of planning and scaling their programs. We'll hear a lot more from Intertrust Group next week, particularly around the technology and data side. So do come along to that. And then from DAC Beechcroft the week after around some of these other themes as well. So moving from some of the big picture to some of the kind of more practical implications in terms of actual delivery of these programs. We know that many of you who've joined us today will be at the forefront of developing and managing CX programs within your respective firms. And we wanted to use today as a bit of an opportunity to share some lessons around how to accelerate the success and the impact of those programs. We've touched on 4 key areas. So the first of which is planning. And I think certainly what we've learned, Bertie, is it's that's a key part of the journey, and not to kind of underestimate the importance of stakeholder management and planning. What's been your experience there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I think it goes without saying that as we begin to see more and more complex client listening programs that involve perhaps pulse surveys, interviews, online surveys, post-matter surveys, whatever it is, we are going to as that complexity increases, we are going to have to put more of an emphasis on planning. But I think beyond that, one key benefit of this is what planning can do for that initial buy-in. I think one thing that's struck me as perhaps slightly different to my experience working with banks compared to professional services firms is that there is this relationship between I suppose you could describe them as the support staff and the account managers, whereby for the most part work flows one way. It seems to flow from those who manage the accounts down towards the support staff, and to a certain extent I feel like these types of client listening programs reverse that a bit. We have this very, very long, in some cases intricate, 2-year-long project where the onus is being put on the partners, for example, in a law firm to reach out, to contact their clients, and to deliver those resources and that time back to business development managers or client relationship managers. I think because this is a bit of a reversal of what perhaps is the normal way of working, I think buy-in needs to be very much at the top of the agenda from the very beginning. And I think the way to achieve this, or certainly what we've seen success in achieving this, is to have that those meetings, those workshops up front, get their input into the design of the surveys, into the design of the entire project, and really cultivate that sense of ownership amongst the entire firm. And I think that certainly comes with proper planning.
Yeah. And what's been your key takeaways from the planning process, Silvia? What advice would you share?
Well, just to back up what my colleague Bertie has said, the stakeholder mapping and identify the user group is a really important point, and should be addressed right at the beginning of the process. We need to understand what sort of reporting they need to use, what sort of key points they need to see on the dashboards, and how they will use the data which is coming from the client feedback program. I would say always start with an open mind on this project. The piloting is really important. So I would say I would say that it offers the opportunity to test the questions at the beginning before everything is, released to the wider audience. So I would say maybe in the pilot process, these new questionnaires should be tested with key clients, with very close clients to the business, which are able to provide feedback straight away. And then, all this feedback is being taken back. Changes are being implemented into the questionnaires and into the style of and the layout of the dashboards where the data is presented, and that's only after this issue. The questionnaires and the dashboard should be released to the wider audience. There are always changes. I would say that there's no one project where changes haven't been done after the first iterations of the questionnaire. So hence my advice: start with an open mind.
Yeah, that's so true. But I think, given some of the trends that we were talking about on the previous slide, actually the need to keep things iterative and constantly evolving is kind of critical, really. I know there's another key lesson really, which is around actually the kind of integration or alignment between CX insights and actual the kind of internal or sometimes kind of wider market viewpoints. And I know, Bertie, you had some thoughts around what you'd seen here that had been particularly successful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think having the context that that you can get from also surveying internal staff alongside your own clients, or even surveying intermediaries and the wider industry alongside your own clients can be hugely beneficial, just in terms of what you actually do with the client feedback once you've received it. For example, if the main bit of feedback that you've got from your client is perhaps that your phone is a little unresponsive when answering emails, it's one thing to kind of take that away and build a strategy from it, and then go back and say to the firm, well, we need to do better at this. But does that necessarily come with an understanding of why that is, what perhaps the stop gaps are internally that might be causing that? Likewise, if your clients indicate that they're particularly interested in diversity and inclusion, for example, that's all well and good, but can you project a brand based on that if that's perhaps not in line with the experiences that staff within your own firm are having?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry to cut you off there. Go on.
So I think that's very valuable, and certainly it's very, very important to properly understand what your capabilities are and what your own staff are thinking when kind of implementing any strategy off the back of the client feedback program.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I mean, I think, again, if I was looking back kind of 5-10 years ago, I think our approaches have changed a lot, and historically it was very much looking at that client perspective. What are they telling us about, our performance? How can we, how can we spot those kind of opportunities for kind of development or improvement? But actually that missing piece of the puzzle, as you articulated, is that kind of internal view. How are we actually going to practically deliver on that? What are the blockers that are stopping us to do that? But also understanding internally, where are those kind of areas of great practice and how do we replicate that? So I think that's kind of incredibly important. I know a third lesson we want to talk about was in terms of information reporting and sharing, and I think certainly what we're seeing here is firms being much more kind of creative, using different channels to do that. I know, Silvia, you touched briefly before on some of the ways that technology is supporting that, but is there anything else you'd want to highlight there?
Yeah, so I would say, having the technology to your fingertips, it's a great, achievement, and it gives us the benefit to approach, the dashboards in a holistic way, to, think about how do we offer reporting to different teams within a firm, and how do we get creative, create all sorts of reports for each one of those teams. We can do benchmarking reports. We can give tailored reports for key clients, for sectors, for certain countries. Support all this tracking year on year. So I think creativity plays a good a big role into developing all these dashboards here.
Yep, absolutely. And a fourth area I just wanted to kind of flag up, one of my personal lessons from working with firms very recently is paying closer attention to that kind of feedback loop, closing things off. So actually being very action orientated in response. So just to give one quick example, how do you ensure that the kind of issues or opportunities flagged during a particular client review are then followed up? What are the processes by which you're actually going back to the client to say, we've heard you, these are the things we're doing in response? And then how are you following that up 6-12 months later to make sure that's happened? I think that would be an interesting piece. We may hear I think from Daisy Beechcroft on some of that in our webinar on the 17th, but we know that firms are starting to put more process around that. And again, so I know that the technology can certainly help with that in terms of red flagging clients, kind of tracking actions around follow-up.
Yes, indeed. So what we call the ticketing technology is essentially an automation of email triggers, which are going out straight away as the response is submitted, allows the firms to kind of monitor and follow up all these, not only maybe unsatisfactory responses, but all the opportunities as well. So with this automation, we can create a view which is available for the whole firm, but also targeted to the relevant MDs which deal with these clients, to be able to contact them straight away, as you said, to say, we hear you, what can we do to help you going forward. And this is really helpful, especially for those global projects where you have many offices across the world, you have many MDs, you have so many clients. So the automation is giving them peace of mind when it comes to not capturing this important data.
Yeah, absolutely. A few minutes left. As a reminder, if anyone's got any questions for Bertie, Silvia, or myself, do put them in the chat, and we'll try and cover them off at the end. I guess what we've wanted to do today is give you a bit of a flavour of some of those key trends, also some of those key learnings, but just to leave you as we wrap up with 3 areas of focus, and these are derived from what we're seeing firms very much at the forefront around CX doing. So to give you kind of one example, very much seeing firms using CX measurement and client listening as a tool to really celebrate and champion those high performers, integrating much more around performance management, appraisal, rewards, but also being savvy about sharing some of those learnings internally, kind of fostering that culture where people want to get recognized for the work they do, that idea of kind of continuous improvement, and really being proud around that and telling stories, using it in marketing, in testimonials, in pitches, etc., etc. I think the second area is really around the kinds of areas being explored, and actually asking a broader set of questions that will allow us to kind of build a data set, CX data set, where we can actually be smart around how that's segmented. Traditionally, firms have looked at things maybe by service line or by office. How are we actually measuring performance around different parts of the business? But actually using CX data as a way to kind of build customer or client segmentation models, and we could do a whole webinar on that, but unfortunately we don't have time to say very much more about that. And the last thing, which again I think many of the leading firms are starting to do, is integrate financial analytics alongside the CX data, looking at customer value, client value, looking at cost of sale, cost of servicing, with the trade-offs around what clients are saying that they really value, and also projecting where those growth opportunities are coming from, and using that to provide much more kind of commercially sensitive, commercially valuable data back to the firm's leadership, who are making those decisions about where to invest for the future. So three big trends, which again could be whole webinars by themselves, and we may well run some sessions later on in the year if there's interest in those. But hopefully that gives you a little bit of a food for thought around what's happening in the market around client listening and client experience. So obviously we can stick around to answer a few questions for those who have them. We've ticked over to the 30-minute mark, so thanks very much for joining us today. As a quick reminder, we've got the next 2 webinars in our series coming up, one next week with Ian Bennison of Intertrust Group, hearing a lot more around some of the things that Silvia was telling us around technology, what are Intertrust doing around using technology to really scale their program globally, what have been some of the lessons there. And then the week later with DAC Beechcroft, again, hearing about how they've been on a journey where feedback has become a much more business as usual activity for their firm, with a real strong sense of internal engagement in that activity. So thank you very much, Silvia. Thank you, Bertie. Thanks for joining us today. We hope you've taken a lot of value from this session. As I said at the start, the recording will be available on our YouTube, and we'll send links around to that shortly. And yeah, we hope you can join us for the next couple of sessions. Do share them with colleagues. If you're interested to talk a little bit about the programs that you've got in your firm, maybe you're thinking about refreshing, or maybe it's even time to start investing in a program, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love a discussion. So please do get in touch, and we hope to hear from you soon.